When the narcissist realizes the empath has learned their language, something ancient awakens in the psychic air between them. You can feel it before it is spoken. It is not a dramatic confession, not a final argument, not even a visible collapse. It is subtler than that. It is the moment the mask meets a mirror that does not flatter it. And in that instant, what you call the narcissist does not simply see you differently. He feels that the entire arrangement of the unconscious has shifted, as if the ground beneath the relationship has quietly changed its laws. For a long time, the empath moves through the world as if love must be earned by sensitivity. They listen, they soothe, they translate moods the way a priest translates a confession. They become a living instrument tuned to the emotional weather of others, and often without realizing it. They enter relationships where their gift becomes a contract written in invisible ink. I will carry what you will not carry. I will feel what you refuse to feel. I will be the container for your unprocessed shadow. This is not weakness. It is a sacred potential that has been captured by an unconscious pattern, because the empath, especially the one raised in chaos or emotional unpredictability, learns early that attunement equals survival. The nervous system becomes a telescope aimed at the other person's face. The soul becomes a weather vane, and the self, this deeper center of wholeness, goes quiet, waiting behind the noise. Now observe the narcissistic personality as a symbolic phenomenon rather than a moral insult. I do not speak of narcissist as a casual label for anyone who wounds you. I mean a particular psychic structure, a personality organized around an image, not around truth. Such a person is not merely vain. They are devoted, almost religiously devoted, to protecting a fragile inner core from exposure. The narcissistic personality builds its life like an architecture of mirrors. Everything must reflect back the desired identity. And if something threatens to reflect what is real pain, shame, dependency, emptiness, then that threatening mirror must be attacked, shattered, or replaced. This is why the narcissist often chooses the empath, not because the empath is foolish, but because the empath is luminous in perception and rich in devotion. The empath can be shaped into a perfect reflective surface. The empath can be trained to provide constant confirmation. The empath becomes the loyal audience, the forgiving witness, the one who says, "You are not that bad," even while being wounded. This creates a dangerous alchemy. The narcissist feels temporarily relieved of inner chaos, and the empath feels temporarily chosen, useful, meaningful. The union becomes a ritual. One offers image, the other offers soul. But here is what changes everything. The moment the empath learns the narcissist's language, what is their language? It is not merely words, it is the syntax of manipulation, the grammar of control, the rhythm of confusion. It is the subtle orchestration of emotional reality. Narcissistic language is the language of the unconscious shadow disguised as charisma. It is the art of making you doubt your own perception while trusting theirs. It is the tactic of making love conditional without stating the condition. It is silence as punishment, affection as reward, blame as hypnosis, charm as anesthesia. It is the constant moving of the inner goalpost, and most crucially, it is the use of projection. You are what I cannot bear to see in myself. In projection, The narcissist attempts to evacuate their shame into your body, your mind, your reputation. You become the container for what they refuse to integrate. At first, the empath speaks in the language of sincerity. They think truth will awaken truth. They think compassion will heal cruelty. They think explanation will produce understanding. So they say, "Let's talk," and the narcissist hears, "Let's give you more material to distort." The empath says, "I feel hurt," and the narcissist hears, "Here is your leverage." The empath says, "I just want clarity," and the narcissist hears, "Here is your opportunity to deepen confusion." This is why the empath becomes exhausted, not because they are too sensitive, but because they are speaking a language that cannot be received by a psyche committed to unreality. Then something begins to happen, often slowly, through repeated injury, through insomnia and inner shaking, through the body's quiet refusal to continue lying. The empath begins to see patterns. They begin to notice how each conversation ends in the same fog, how each apology contains a hidden accusation, how each gift contains a hook, how each tenderness has a price, how their own nervous system has become a prison. And this is where the great psychological shift occurs. The empath begins to learn the hidden language, not to become cruel, but to become conscious. This is an enormous step in individuation. Individuation is the process by which a person becomes who they truly are, not who they were trained to be. It is not a happy slogan. It is a descent. It is a confrontation with everything in you that you would rather not see: your rage, your need, your longing to be chosen, your fear of abandonment, your secret wish to control love by being indispensable. The empath must eventually discover that their goodness may contain an unconscious strategy. If I am endlessly understanding, I will never be left. This is not moral failure. It is a survival spell, but spells must be broken if the soul is to mature. When the empath learns the narcissist's language, they begin to recognize the spell work. They stop feeding the illusion with naive innocence. They can hear the subtext beneath the sentence. They can feel when warmth is being used as a tool. They notice when affection is timed. They notice when conflict is staged. They notice the false helplessness, the manufactured outrage, the accidental cruelty, the sudden amnesia, the shifting narrative, the always perfect justification. The empath begins to see the narcissist not as a god or a monster, but as a psyche trapped in a brittle fortress. And in that moment, power changes not outwardly, not theatrically, but archetypally. The narcissist panics when the empath learns their language, because the empath has stopped being a mirror and has become an eye. They have stopped being a pliable field and have become a boundary, and boundaries are terrifying to a narcissistic psyche. Not because boundaries are aggressive, but because boundaries imply reality. A boundary says, there is an edge, there is an end, there is a consequence, and consequence is exactly what the narcissist has attempted to escape through image. In the beginning of such relationships, the narcissist experiences you as an extension of their will. You are part of the realm they can influence, but when you learn their language, you become psychologically independent. You start to detect the lever before it is pulled. You start to see the trap before you step into it. You stop offering the emotional reactions that fuel their dominance, And this is why the narcissist escalates or destabilizes. You are no longer participating in the ritual of their control. I want you to understand something profound. The narcissist does not fear your anger as much as they fear your clarity. Your anger can be manipulated, your tears can be used, your pleading can be exploited, even your departure can be framed as proof that you are unstable. But clarity, quiet, steady, unmistakable clarity. This is the enemy of the false self, because clarity requires no performance. It is simply the light of the conscious mind, and the narcissist lives by controlling the lighting in the room. Let us enter deeper, because what you call narcissism has roots in archetypal material. In myth, Narcissus is not just vain. He is captivated by an image and cannot reach the real relationship. He dies not because he loves himself, but because he cannot love beyond himself. He is imprisoned by a reflection. This is the tragic aspect, often overlooked. The narcissistic personality is not an abundance of self-love, but a profound incapacity for genuine self-contact. Their inner life is often empty, brittle, defended. They have substituted image for essence. Therefore, the empath's awakening is experienced as threat. If you see through the image, then what remains? This is why, when the empath learns their language, the narcissist senses a coming death, not physical, but psychic. The death of the arrangement, the death of the game, the death of the illusion that the empath can be hypnotized indefinitely. And because the narcissist cannot mourn the truth like a normal soul, they attempt to annihilate it. They may suddenly accuse you of being the manipulator. They may claim you are cold, selfish, changed, unrecognizable. And here you must not become confused. Yes, you have changed. You have returned to yourself. You have withdrawn your psychic energy from the false altar. In analysis, we often observe that the empath carries a certain archetype: the wounded healer, the one who can endure pain and still offer meaning. But if the healer is unconscious, they become the martyr. They become the one who sacrifices the self to keep another person from facing themselves. And this is not healing. This is collusion with the shadow. So the moment you learn their language, you begin to do something revolutionary. You stop offering your soul as collateral. You may notice a strange shift in your inner world. It is as though your dream life changes, and dreams are the great letters of the unconscious, written in symbolic ink. Perhaps you begin dreaming of locked doors, of labyrinths, of houses with hidden rooms. Perhaps you dream of being chased, but you suddenly turn around and face what chases you. Perhaps you dream of speaking a language you did not know you possessed. This is not accidental. When consciousness expands, the psyche reorganizes. The unconscious no longer needs to scream in symptoms. It begins to communicate in images. One empath once told me a dream. She stood in a theater, watching her own relationship like a play. The narcissistic partner was on stage, speaking passionately to the audience, but his words were nonsense. Beautiful nonsense. The audience clapped. Then she looked down and saw that her hands were holding the script. She realized she had been feeding him the lines. At that moment in the dream, she stopped reading. The narcissist froze on stage, his mouth open, unable to continue. The audience became restless. The lights flickered, and then the stage began to collapse. Do you understand? This is the dream of awakening. The empath holds the script because they have been unconsciously providing energy to the false self. They have been performing the ritual of emotional availability that keeps the narcissist's image alive. When the empath stops, the narcissistic performance cannot continue smoothly. The theater collapses because it was never built on truth. It was built on participation. Now, I must be careful here. Learning someone's language does not mean becoming them. It does not mean adopting manipulation. It means recognizing the pattern so you are no longer captured by it. There is a sacred difference between mirroring and mimicking. The empath learns the language the way a physician learns the symptoms of a disease, not to become diseased, but to heal the host. The host, in this case, is the psyche itself. Your psyche has been infected by confusion, by the internalization of another person's distortion. You begin to doubt your perception. You begin to feel guilty for existing. You begin to apologize for needing. You begin to confuse love with tension. When you learn their language, you regain the ability to name what is happening. Naming is powerful. In many traditions, to name a spirit is to break its spell. In psychological terms, to name a pattern is to bring it from unconscious compulsion into conscious choice. This is why narcissistic dynamics depend on your wordlessness. They depend on your inability to define what you feel. They depend on your hesitation, your self-questioning, your moral fear of appearing harsh. They depend on your empathy being untrained in boundaries. So, what happens inside the narcissist when they realize you have learned the language? First, their tactics become less subtle. This is paradoxical, but it is often true. When a manipulator loses invisible power, they increase visible pressure. They may provoke you to see if they can still extract emotional fuel. They may intensify blame. They may attempt seduction. They may alternate cruelty and sweetness more quickly, as if turning the temperature rapidly will disorient your nervous system. This is a desperate attempt to regain the old hypnosis. Second, they may become obsessed with your inner world. They will suddenly demand to know what you think, who you talk to, what you plan. Why? Because you have become unknown, and to the narcissistic psyche, the unknown is dangerous. They need you readable. They need you predictable. They need your psyche as a territory they can navigate. When you become inwardly sovereign, they feel exiled from what they assumed they owned. Third, they may attempt a final rewriting of history. This is one of the darkest aspects. They will claim that you were always the problem, that your memory is wrong, that your feelings are exaggerations, that you are unstable. This is not merely cruelty, it is psychic self-defense. If they can convince you that your awakening is madness, then they can keep their illusion intact. But your awakening is not madness. It is sanity returning after a long intoxication. Here I must speak directly to you, as if you were sitting before me in a quiet room, and I could see the fatigue behind your eyes. If you are the empath in such a dynamic, you have likely tried to explain your way into being treated properly. You have likely over-communicated. You have likely performed emotional labor like a servant of peace. And yet peace never came, because peace cannot be negotiated with a psyche that uses negotiation as a weapon. The great turning point is not when you finally win the argument, it is when you no longer need to argue in order to trust what you see. That is what it means to learn their language. You stop seeking consent for your perception. You stop asking the narcissist to confirm reality. You stop bringing your truth into the court of their approval. You realize something shocking. The person who benefits most from your confusion is the least qualified to clarify it. And this produces an archetypal awakening. The empath begins to meet their own shadow. Yes, your shadow, not the narcissist's shadow, yours. Because the empath often believes they are all light. They identify with goodness. They fear their own anger. They fear their own selfishness. They fear their own capacity to walk away. But what is repressed becomes fate. What is denied becomes destiny. The empath who cannot access anger becomes trapped in endurance. The empath who cannot access selfishness becomes depleted. The empath who cannot access the capacity to withdraw becomes prey. So the psyche begins to integrate the very energies it once rejected. The empath discovers, I can say no without becoming cruel. I can leave without becoming heartless. I can stop feeding this without becoming bad. And the narcissist senses this integration as danger, because now you are not only empathetic, you are whole, and wholeness cannot be controlled by shame. So, this is the real terror for the narcissist. The empath is no longer participating in the archetype of the sacrificial lamb. The empath is stepping into the archetype of the awakened witness, and the witness is the beginning of justice, not social justice, not revenge, but inner justice. Psychic justice. The soul demands order. The soul demands truth. The soul demands that energy returns to its rightful center. And that center is the self. The self is not the ego. The ego says, I want them to love me. The self says, I want to be real. The ego says, if I explain better, I will be understood. The self says, if I remain true, I will be free. The ego says, maybe it's my fault. The self says, I will no longer abandon myself to preserve a fantasy. I'm Toulouse. When the empath learns the narcissist's language, the empath stops negotiating with the false self and begins conversing with the self, and the narcissist cannot compete with the self because the narcissist kingdom is illusion, while the self is reality. This is not merely psychological, it is spiritual in the deepest sense, because the spiritual journey is not about becoming positive, it is about becoming whole, and wholeness requires that you stop offering your sacred sensitivity to the altar of another person's fragmentation. If you stay with me in this lecture, you will begin to see that the narcissist's panic is a sign not that you are becoming cruel, but that you are becoming conscious. And consciousness, once born, cannot be unborn. It can be resisted, delayed, betrayed, but it returns like dawn. The dawn does not argue with the night, it simply arrives. And now we arrive at the part that most people do not want to hear, because it is too honest, too intimate, too archetypal. When the narcissist realizes the empath has learned their language, the first battlefield is not outside, it is inside you. The narcissist's panic is only the outer weather. The true storm is the moment your own psyche begins to withdraw its energy from the old spell. That withdrawal feels at first like guilt, then like fear, then like loneliness, and finally, if you are brave enough, like liberation that is almost unbearable in its purity, because freedom is not merely a relief. Freedom is also an initiation. It demands that you become responsible for your own soul, no longer using the other person as a theater where your unresolved wounds can continue to play. You must understand, a narcissistic dynamic is not merely a relationship, it is a psychic system. It is a closed circle of unconscious exchange. The narcissist provides intensity, drama, glamour, seduction, a sense of specialness, a myth of destiny. The empath provides emotional labor, forgiveness, interpretation, meaning, endurance, spiritual hope. Together, they create a world, a small, sealed universe where reality is suspended and the nervous system is kept in constant arousal. This is why such relationships are addictive, not because you are weak, but because the psyche confuses intensity with aliveness when it has been starved of stable love. So, the moment you learn their language, you begin to see the mechanics of addiction. You see that the high comes from relief after pain. You see that tenderness is not free. It is a currency being traded to purchase your obedience. You see that conflict is not accidental, it is engineered. Because chaos keeps you reactive, and reactivity keeps you controllable. This is why the narcissist often becomes most loving right after cruelty. It is not love as you know it. It is reinforcement. It is the training of the nervous system. It is the creation of a psychological leash you cannot see. And when you start to perceive this clearly, something in you becomes quiet, a sacred quiet, a quiet that is not numbness, but discernment, and this quiet is terrifying to the narcissist. You see, the narcissist does not truly fear your words. They fear your silence when it is no longer pleading. They fear the silence that contains decision, because decision is the death of their influence. As long as you are negotiating, you are still inside their world. As long as you are explaining, you are still offering your psyche as a battleground. As long as you are trying to prove your innocence, you are still accepting their false court. But when you become quiet, truly quiet, the narcissist realizes you have left the theater, you have stepped outside the game, you are beginning to speak another language, the language of the self. Now let us explore the deeper symbolism of this moment. In the unconscious, the narcissist often represents a particular archetype for the empath: the devouring father, the enchanted prince, the tyrannical king, the trickster lover, the wounded god, the vampire, the false prophet. The empath does not consciously choose these symbols, but the psyche does. It selects a figure that fits the inner myth. Many empaths carry an unconscious longing to redeem the broken masculine, to heal the wound in the other, to prove that love can transform darkness. This longing is not foolish, it is mythic. It belongs to the archetype of the feminine principle that seeks to bring soul into matter, warmth into coldness, humanity into the frozen psyche. But when this archetype is hijacked by trauma, the empath becomes a priestess in service to a god that is not real. They worship the potential of the narcissist, not the reality. They fall in love with the promise, not the pattern. They become loyal to a future that never arrives. And the narcissist encourages this because it gives them power. Your devotion to what they could be becomes their escape from what they are. The moment you learn their language, You stop worshipping potential. You begin to worship truth. And truth is a ruthless God. Truth does not negotiate. Truth does not bargain. Truth simply reveals. This is when the narcissist experiences what I would call the collapse of enchantment. The narcissist's spell has always been a kind of glamour. Glamour is not simply attraction. Glamour is a fog that distorts perception. It is an atmosphere that makes you doubt your own instincts. It makes you excuse what you would never excuse. It makes you tolerate what would once horrify you. It makes you betray your own body's signals, your own soul's alarm bells, because you are intoxicated by the myth. When the empath learns the narcissist's language, the glamour collapses. You begin to see their words not as divine, but as strategic. You see their tears not as vulnerable, but as timed. You see their apologies not as remorse, but as tools. You see their anger not as passion, but as intimidation. You see their affection not as devotion, but as control. This does not mean they never feel anything. It means their feelings are not integrated into character. Their emotions are used, not lived. And what does the empath do then? At first, the empath tries to apply the old solution. If I explain that I see the pattern, they will change. But consciousness does not work like that. When you reveal the pattern to someone who is invested in the pattern, you do not liberate them, you threaten them, and threat produces escalation. So the narcissist responds in predictable stages. They test you, they provoke, they sweeten, they withdraw, they punish, they charm, they accuse, they become suddenly spiritual, suddenly remorseful, suddenly romantic. They may even say the exact phrases you have longed to hear for years. This is one of the cruelest things. The narcissist often becomes most verbally aware precisely when you are leaving. They can speak the language of healing. They can name your trauma. They can quote psychology. They can appear transformed. But this is not transformation, it is adaptation. It is mimicry. It is the trickster wearing the robe of the sage. And if you have not learned the deeper language, you will be captured again, because empaths are hypnotized by words. Words are their element. They live in meaning. They live in subtlety. They believe the psyche is moved by insight. And yes, an integrated psyche is moved by insight. But a fragmented psyche uses insight as costume. So the empath must learn to watch behavior, not poetry. Watch patterns, not promises. Watch consistency, not confession. Now I want to take you into a deeper layer, projection and counter-projection. This is where the true psychological drama unfolds. When the empath begins to see clearly, the narcissist often accuses the empath of becoming what the narcissist actually is. The narcissist says, "You're manipulative now, you're cold now, you're selfish now, you're the narcissist." Do you see what is happening? The narcissist feels their control slipping. They feel exposed. They feel the shame rising. And because shame is unbearable to them, they eject it into you. They project it onto you, hoping you will carry it so they can remain pure in their own eyes. But here is the key. The empath used to accept this projection because of their own shadow. The empath has long feared being selfish. They have long feared being cruel. They have long feared being bad. So when the narcissist accuses them, it triggers the ancient wound. maybe I am wrong, maybe I am the problem, maybe I am unlovable. This is where the empath collapses back into the old role. But when the empath learns the narcissist's language, they begin to recognize projection as a psychic weapon. They stop internalizing it. They say inwardly, "This is not my truth." They begin to separate. They begin to see, your accusation is your confession. And this is the moment the narcissist truly panics, because the narcissist requires your self-doubt in order to remain powerful. If you do not doubt yourself, their spells bounce off your psyche like arrows hitting stone. This is why learning their language is not merely cognitive. It is nervous system level. It is embodied. It is the ability to remain calm in the face of provocation. It is the ability to hold your center while someone tries to shake it. The empath must learn to stop explaining, because explaining is often the rope you hand to the narcissist to bind you. Explanation is offered in good faith, but it becomes ammunition in bad hands. So the empath's new language is not verbal. It is energetic. It is boundary. It is the quiet no. It is the refusal to react. It is the refusal to plead. It is the refusal to perform innocence. It is the refusal to prove your goodness to someone who benefits from your guilt. Now, let us speak of the shadow, because this is where your transformation becomes sacred. The narcissist has always been your shadow teacher, though in a brutal way. They force you to confront the parts of you that you abandoned, your anger, your self-protection, your sovereignty, your ability to disappoint. Many empaths were trained to be pleasing. They were trained to be good. They were trained to be agreeable, forgiving, quiet. They were trained to be emotional servants in a family system where love was conditional. So they associate boundaries with danger. They associate selfhood with abandonment. They associate no with punishment. Then the narcissist arrives like a destiny figure. At first they feel like home because they match the emotional pattern of your childhood. There is unpredictability. There is tension. There is relief. There is the anxious waiting for affection. There is the thrill of winning it back. This is why people call it trauma bonding. But deeper than that, it is the psyche returning to a familiar script because it wants to finish the story differently. The soul unconsciously believes, if I can finally make this person love me, I will heal the original wound. This is the tragedy. You are not only loving the narcissist, you are trying to rescue your own inner child through them. And when you learn their language, you finally realize the narcissist is not the doorway to healing. They are the repetition of the wound. This is the moment the inner child begins to awaken, not as helpless, but as furious. And this fury is holy. It is the life force reclaiming itself. It is not hatred. It is not revenge. It is the psyche saying, enough. You may suddenly feel anger you never allowed yourself to feel. You may feel disgust. You may feel clarity that cuts like a blade. And you may think, this is not me. But it is you, the you, who was buried under decades of adaptation. The narcissist will sense this. They will sense your anger not as emotion, but as separation. Anger is the beginning of individuation, because anger says, I am separate from you. I have a boundary. I have a self. That is why anger was forbidden in your childhood if you were trained to be the good child. That is why anger was punished, because anger creates individuality. So now you see why the narcissist panics. You are no longer psychologically merged. You are not the empathic ocean that absorbs everything. You are becoming a shore. You are becoming form. You are becoming structure, and structure is what the narcissist lacks internally. They have no inner structure, so they try to control external structure. They try to control you, but you are no longer available as a substitute nervous system. If you want to know whether you have truly learned their language, watch what happens inside you when they try to pull you back. In the past, their sadness would soften you instantly. Their charm would confuse you. Their rage would frighten you. Their silence would torture you. But now, something else happens. You still feel because you are empathic, but you do not lose yourself. You can witness their manipulation without being swallowed by it. You can feel compassion without surrender. You can see their pain without offering your body as the sacrifice. This is the beginning of spiritual adulthood, and it comes with grief, a grief that is rarely spoken, because when the empath awakens, they do not only lose the narcissist, they lose the fantasy, they lose the dream of being the one who finally healed them. They lose the story where love conquers everything. They lose the identity of being endlessly patient. They lose the purpose that came from being needed. They lose the addiction to intensity, and this grief can feel like death. Many empaths confuse this grief with proof they should return. But grief is not a sign you are wrong. Grief is a sign you have broken the bond. Let me speak about the bond more precisely. A trauma bond is not merely emotional attachment. It is psychic entanglement. Your nervous system becomes wired to their approval. Your body becomes trained to equate anxiety with love. Your mind becomes obsessed with solving the puzzle of them. Why? Because the psyche hates unfinished stories. And the narcissist is an unfinished story wearing a human face. They are constantly almost there, almost loving, almost understanding, almost changing. This almost becomes your prison. When you learn their language, you see the almost as a mechanism. You see that the narcissist survives by keeping you in the hallway, never letting you enter the room of true intimacy. They keep you waiting at the threshold of authentic connection, and you live there, starving, because the threshold feels like hope. But hope must mature into truth. Hope must become wisdom, otherwise it becomes self-betrayal. So the empath's task now is not merely to leave the narcissist. It is to reclaim the parts of the self that were outsourced to the relationship. Your confidence, your authority, your inner certainty, your right to exist without earning it. You must become your own witness. You must become your own protector. You must become your own home. This is why the narcissist's panic is actually a prophecy. It is the prophecy that you are awakening. It is the prophecy that the spell is ending. It is the prophecy that the unconscious contract is being torn. Because the empath's awakening is not a breakup, it is a psychological revolution. And revolutions are never neat. They are messy. They involve relapses. They involve longing. They involve nights when you miss the person who hurt you because you miss the intensity, because you miss the myth, because you miss the identity you had while trying to save them. Do not judge yourself for this. This is the nervous system detoxing from a drug. The drug is intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable reward. The psyche becomes addicted to unpredictability because it learned in childhood that love arrives unpredictably. So it feels normal, it feels like fate, but fate is often just repetition. Now, as your consciousness grows, you will begin to have different dreams. Dreams of water turning still, dreams of a house being cleaned, dreams of a strange animal appearing wolf, raven, leoness, owl. These are not random, they are symbols of your instinct returning. The empath often lives too high in the heart, too far from the belly. They are all compassion and no tooth. But the psyche requires tooth, the psyche requires bite. The animal is the archetype of instinct. The animal comes in dreams when the soul is reclaiming its primal truth. And this is the turning point. You no longer fear your instinct, you begin to trust it more than their words. At that moment, the narcissist realizes you have learned their language. You no longer worship their performance. You no longer kneel at the altar of their moods. You no longer sacrifice your reality to maintain their illusion. And they will try one last time. They may become tender, they may become cruel, they may become spiritual, they may become pitiful, they may become heroic, they may become suicidal in expression, or dramatic in confession. They may say, "You are my soul, you are the only one, I can't live without you," and the empath's heart will tremble, because the empath's heart is real. But remember, your heart is not the only organ of truth. You also have discernment, you also have instinct, you also have memory, and memory is sacred. Memory is the archive of reality. Do not let them burn your archive. You will know you are free when you can feel compassion without obedience. And that is what terrifies the narcissist. Compassion without obedience is the end of their empire. Because their empire was built on your self-abandonment. And now, slowly, you stop abandoning yourself. You return, not to them, to you. And now, in this third movement, we step into the most dangerous territory, not because it is dark, but because it is true. When the narcissist realizes the empath has learned their language, the relationship ceases to be merely personal. It becomes symbolic, it becomes archetypal. It becomes a psychic war between illusion and individuation. And the battlefield, again and again, is not the conversation, not the messages, not the breakup or the return. The battlefield is the place inside you where your soul once mistook suffering for loyalty. There is a secret reason this moment feels so electric. The empath's awakening threatens the narcissist not only because it removes supply, not only because it exposes tactics, but because it does something even more humiliating to the false self. It reveals that the narcissist was never truly powerful. They were only influential over the part of you that was unintegrated. They were strong only where you were still wounded. They ruled only the kingdom you had not yet reclaimed. And when that kingdom returns to you, the narcissist's power collapses the way a dream collapses when you wake up. Not with fireworks, with a sudden absence of belief. This is why the narcissist's response often becomes strangely theatrical. You may notice how suddenly everything becomes a performance. Even their suffering can become staged. Even their apologies can become poetic. Even their confession can feel rehearsed. Because the narcissist senses the audience has changed. They sense you are no longer watching with hungry eyes. You are watching with discerning eyes. and discerning eyes are devastating to anyone who lives by acting. At this stage, the narcissist often introduces a new weapon, moral inversion. It is one of the finest tricks of the shadow. Moral inversion means they take the very qualities that once made you empathic and twist them into evidence of your cruelty. They say, you used to care, you used to be kind, you used to understand, and what they really mean is, you used to be accessible, you used to be manipulable, you used to be open without protection, you used to deliver your inner world into their hands like a gift. The narcissist mourns not your love, but your availability, so they attempt to make your boundaries look like violence. They attempt to make your silence look like abandonment. They attempt to make your self-respect look like ego. They attempt to make your clarity look like coldness. And the empath must now pass a great test. Can you tolerate being misunderstood by someone who benefited from misunderstanding you? This is the moment where many empaths collapse back into the old spell. They cannot bear the narcissist's narrative. They cannot bear being painted as the villain. They cannot bear the feeling that someone out there might believe the narcissist. They cannot bear being seen as bad, but this fear reveals the deepest wound, the wound of the good child. The good child archetype is one of the most tragic. The good child is not simply polite. The good child is someone whose love depended on being harmless. They learned early that anger leads to punishment, that needs lead to rejection, that boundaries lead to withdrawal. So they became agreeable, they became pleasing, they became emotionally skilled, they became a caretaker, they became, in a psychological sense, a servant of harmony. But harmony purchased at the cost of self is not harmony. It is psychic slavery disguised as virtue. When the narcissist realizes you have learned their language, they aim directly at this wound. They try to provoke you into proving you are still the good child. They try to lure you back into explaining, justifying, apologizing, calming, rescuing. They want you to return to the role that makes them feel safe. The role where you are morally superior but psychologically submissive. The narcissist loves your goodness the way a thief loves an unlocked door. So what must happen now? The empath must integrate a new archetype, the warrior. And do not misunderstand me, the warrior is not the aggressor. The warrior is not cruelty. The warrior is the part of the psyche that can protect what is sacred. The warrior says, there is a line. The warrior says, you may not enter. The warrior says, my inner world is not public property. The warrior says, my compassion is not a resource you can mine. Many empaths fear this archetype because they think it will destroy their tenderness. But tenderness without protection becomes martyrdom. Tenderness without protection becomes leakage. Tenderness without protection becomes self-erasure. The warrior does not destroy the empath. It completes the empath. It creates wholeness. It creates the kind of love that is real, because it is not desperate. At this stage, the narcissist becomes extremely sensitive to your energy. Almost like an animal sensing a predator, they may not admit it consciously, but their unconscious detects that you have changed. Your tone changes, your eyes change, your willingness to debate disappears, your emotional hooks become less accessible. You stop reacting to bait, you stop flinching at blame, you stop chasing their warmth, and because their entire system was built on your chasing, They experience your stillness as annihilation. This is where the narcissist often intensifies the push-pull. They will provoke separation and then panic at it. They will push you away and then lure you back. They will accuse you and then seduce you. They will block and then beg. They will insult and then cry. You must see this clearly. It is not confusion. It is strategy. It is the nervous system trap. It is meant to keep you disoriented so you cannot form stable inner ground. Disorientation is the favorite environment of the manipulator. In disorientation, you lose your compass. In disorientation, you seek external confirmation. In disorientation, you forget what you know. That is why the narcissist will often create crises right when you are becoming calm. Calm is dangerous. Calm gives you the ability to remember. So now, I want to take you into the deeper psychology of language itself. Because the title speaks of learning their language, language here means the symbolic code by which the narcissist and empath have communicated unconsciously for years. The narcissist speaks in triggers. The empath speaks in repair. The narcissist speaks in destabilization. The empath speaks in healing. The narcissist speaks in distortion. The empath speaks in meaning. They are speaking different dialects of the unconscious. The empath believes that being understood is safety. This is why they over-explain. They think, if I can just show my heart clearly enough, the other person will soften. But what if the other person is not softened by seeing your heart, but empowered by it? What if your transparency is not received as intimacy, but used as leverage? Then learning their language means learning to stop giving away your inner map. It means learning when not to speak. It means learning when to exit a conversation. It means learning when to withdraw your emotional energy so the narcissist cannot drink it. This is where people become confused and say, so should I become cold? Should I manipulate back? No, if you become them, you remain in their world. You remain trapped in the same psychic prison. The goal is not to become the narcissist. The goal is to become immune. Immunity is not coldness. Immunity is boundary. Immunity is the ability to remain yourself in the presence of distortion. Immunity is the capacity to hold reality without needing someone else to agree. This requires a frightening spiritual step, the willingness to lose the narcissist's approval forever. Because deep in the empath there is still a child who wants the narcissist to finally say, you were right, you were good, you were enough, I'm sorry. This child wants justice to come in the form of recognition, but the narcissist rarely grants true recognition, because recognition implies guilt, and guilt implies shame, and shame collapses their false self. So the empath must release the fantasy that closure will come from the narcissist. Closure comes from the self, and when closure comes from the self, the narcissist loses their final hook. Now we enter the most mystical part, the part Jung would call the confrontation with the shadow through symbol and dream, because at this point, as you separate from the narcissistic system, the psyche begins to produce strange images. Many empaths report a sensation as if they are waking up from a trance. They suddenly see colors differently, music hits differently, silence feels deeper, their body begins to speak again. Sometimes they feel grief in the bones, sometimes they feel nausea, sometimes they feel energy surges. Rage waves trembling. The body is discharging what it could not discharge while under psychological pressure. This is not merely emotional, it is archetypal, because what has been happening is possession. Yes, possession, not supernatural in the childish sense, but psychological possession. The psyche is possessed by a complex. A complex is an autonomous cluster of emotion and memory that behaves like an inner personality. The narcissist has become a complex in you. Their voice lives in your head. Their criticism lives in your conscience. Their gaze lives in your nervous system. Even after you leave them, you may still hear them. You may still fear them. You may still explain yourself to them in your imagination. This is possession by the narcissistic complex. Learning their language means recognizing that voice as not yourself. This is why, in the beginning of freedom, you may feel emptiness, because the complex leaves a vacuum when it loosens. You were oriented around them. You were always scanning, adjusting, anticipating. Your psyche was orbiting their moods. When you stop orbiting, you feel dizzy. It is like leaving a spinning machine. Even when you stand still, your body feels motion. This is withdrawal from the relationship addiction. This is the nervous system recalibrating to safety. And here, something essential must happen. You must endure the boredom of peace. This is difficult for the empath who has been trained in chaos. Peace can feel unfamiliar, even suspicious. The psyche may crave intensity. You may miss the drama. You may miss the highs. You may even miss the pain, because pain at least made you feel connected. But this is the deepest truth. You were not addicted to the narcissist. You were addicted to the emotional rhythm that resembled your childhood. And now the psyche must learn a new rhythm. In dreams, this often appears as a house. The house is the psyche. In early dreams, the house is chaotic, broken doors, locked rooms, strangers inside. This symbolizes that your inner world has been invaded. It is not fully yours. It is occupied. But as healing continues, you may dream of cleaning the house, repairing windows, changing the locks. This is the psyche reclaiming itself. Sometimes you dream of an intruder. You catch someone inside your home. You feel rage. You chase them out. That intruder is the narcissistic complex. That is the internalized voice. Your dream is telling you you are ready to defend your inner territory. And then, perhaps, you dream of an animal, a black wolf, standing at the boundary of your house, watching, or an owl on a branch at night, or a lioness pacing. These animals are the guardians of instinct. They represent the part of you that knows without explaining. The narcissist hates this part of you. Why? Because instinct cannot be gaslit. Instinct does not debate. Instinct is immediate truth. So, the moment you learn their language, you do not simply become smarter, you become instinctual again, you become rooted, and the narcissist experiences rootedness as threat because they cannot root. They live in performance, in shifting identity, in adaptation. Their self is not a tree with deep roots. It is a mask on a moving face. So when they see you rooting into yourself, they panic because they cannot follow you there. They cannot manipulate you there. They cannot enter the temple of your inner authority. This is why, at this stage, they may attempt what I call the final possession attempt. They will bring a crisis that is meant to awaken your savior archetype, a sudden illness, a collapse, a confession, a tragedy, something that activates your deepest compassion, something that makes you say, I cannot leave now, be careful. I am not saying their crisis is always fake. Sometimes it is real. But even real crises can be used unconsciously as a rope to pull you back. The empath must learn discernment. Compassion does not require self-sacrifice. You can care without returning to bondage. Now, a mature empath does something extraordinary. They stop trying to convince the narcissist of reality. They stop trying to win the moral court. They stop trying to be seen correctly. They allow the narcissist to misunderstand them, to accuse them, to demonize them, not because it is pleasant, but because they understand. This is the narcissist's last attempt to control narrative. If they can control the story, they can still control the emotional field. But the mature empath refuses the narrative battlefield entirely. They walk away from the story. And this is psychologically holy, because it means you are no longer living in the narcissist's mythology, you are building your own. You begin to write a different inner script, one where love is not earned through endurance, one where intimacy does not require suffering, one where your sensitivity is not a leash, one where your soul does not have to shrink to be loved. This is individuation. This is the sacred adulthood of the psyche. And now, if you are listening closely, you will feel a subtle shift in the room. The lecture becomes quieter, the voice becomes slower, because we are approaching the deepest truth of all. The narcissist panic is not the main story. Your awakening is. The narcissist is only the catalyst that forced your psyche to evolve. They were the dark teacher, the painful initiation, the shadow priest that dragged you into your own underworld so you could retrieve something you lost, your authority, your selfhood, your sacred no, your right to exist without explanation. And once you retrieve it, you will never again be the same. You will still love, but you will not beg. You will still feel, but you will not abandon yourself. You will still empathize, but you will not become a container for someone else's shadow. And this is the moment the narcissist realizes with terror that you have learned their language because you no longer speak it back. You simply stop participating, and their world collapses, not because you destroy it, but because you withdraw your belief. That is the true exorcism, not hatred, not revenge, not war, but awakening. And now we enter the final movement, the place where the story stops being about them and becomes entirely about you, about what is being born inside you when the narcissist finally realizes the empath has learned their language. Because if you listen carefully, you will notice that the narcissist's panic is not merely an emotional reaction. It is an omen. It is the sound of a psychic regime collapsing. It is the vibration that occurs when a false kingdom loses the tribute it once extracted from your soul. At this point you may ask, what happens next? And I will answer you as a psychologist who has watched countless human beings step out of enchantment. The next stage is not triumph. It is not instant peace. It is not a clean ending. It is the slow, sacred construction of a new inner order. It is the rebuilding of the psyche after years of living in distortion. It is the return of the self as the governing center. Most people imagine healing as relief, but the truth is more paradoxical. Healing often feels like emptiness first, because you have lived so long in a psychological storm that calm feels like absence. You have lived so long in emotional hypervigilance that safety feels like boredom. You have lived so long being defined by someone else's gaze that solitude feels like annihilation. And this is where many empaths become frightened, not of pain, but of stillness. Stillness is dangerous because it reveals what the noise was covering, and what it reveals is the deeper wound, the wound that existed before the narcissist, the wound that made the narcissist feel like destiny in the first place. This is the wound of being unseen, the wound of being valued only for what you provide, the wound of being loved conditionally, the wound of having to earn safety by being emotionally skilled. The narcissist did not create this wound, they exploited it. They found the open door in your psyche. And now, as you close that door, you must go inward and meet what has been waiting there for years. The abandoned part of you. This is where the empath's awakening becomes a true descent, an underworld journey like the ancient myths. In mythology, the hero descends into darkness not to become dark, but to retrieve the lost treasure. And in your story, the treasure is not the narcissist's love. The treasure is your own soul returned to you. You see, when the empath learns the narcissist's language, the empath also learns something else, that love without selfhood is not love, it is abandonment in disguise. You may have called it devotion, you may have called it loyalty, you may have called it being the bigger person, but beneath it was often a silent self-erasure, a quiet agreement to shrink, and the self cannot live in shrinkage. The self will eventually revolt, it will create symptoms, it will create exhaustion, it will create depression, it will create a strange inner deadness, not to punish you, but to save you, because the psyche would rather break than live forever in a lie. So now, in this final stage, the empath is asked to do something radical, to become loyal to themselves, even if no one applauds it, even if it looks selfish to the world, even if the narcissist paints them as cruel. This loyalty is not narcissism. It is individuation. It is psychological adulthood. It is the act of saying, I will no longer betray my inner truth to preserve a bond that destroys me. I know, but how does this loyalty express itself? Here we enter the secret art of energetic boundaries, of inner sovereignty, of what you might call spiritual immunity. Because the narcissist will not always vanish politely. They may return like a ghost, they may linger through messages, through friends, through rumors, through sudden memories. They may attempt to haunt you through narrative, they may try to reinsert themselves through guilt, they may even appear in your dreams, because the psyche is still detoxing from their presence. And this is where your growth becomes visible. In the past, any contact with them would cause tremors in your inner world. A text could ruin your day. A memory could pull you into the old trance. A small kindness from them could reopen the entire mythology. But now, as your language evolves, you begin to experience something new. You can observe without collapsing. You can remember without romanticizing. You can feel without obeying. This is the birth of inner authority. Inner authority means your nervous system no longer asks the narcissist for permission to be calm. Your mind no longer asks them for permission to believe yourself. Your heart no longer begs them for crumbs to prove you are lovable. You become your own witness, your own protector, your own source of meaning, and this is the most humiliating thing for the narcissist, because it means you no longer need them to define you. Need is the rope of control. When the rope is cut, the narcissist has nothing to pull. Now let us speak of the most subtle danger in this final stage, the temptation to become obsessed with the narcissist even after you see clearly. Many empaths, once awakened, become scholars of the narcissist. They study tactics, they watch videos, they analyze patterns endlessly. At first, this is healthy because it restores reality and breaks gaslighting. But there is a hidden trap. The narcissist can remain the center of your psyche even after you leave. Your hatred can become the new bond. Your fascination can become the new tether. You may think you are healing, but you are still orbiting them. So the final liberation is not merely leaving the narcissist. It is removing them from the throne inside your psyche. Because the true tyrant is not always the person outside you. Sometimes the tyrant is the internalized presence that still dictates your emotional weather. This is where the deepest work begins. Reclaiming projection. Projection is not only what the narcissist does. The empath projects too, but in a different way. The empath projects goodness, depth, potential, sacredness onto the narcissist. They see the hidden child in them, the wounded soul in them, the secret softness. Sometimes this is real, but the empath inflates it. They magnify it. They make it central. Why? Because it allows them to stay. It allows them to endure. It allows them to justify suffering as spiritual labor. But the moment you awaken, you must ask, what did I project onto them that belongs to me? Perhaps you projected power. Perhaps you projected confidence. Perhaps you projected freedom. Perhaps you projected sexual magnetism. Perhaps you projected the right to be selfish. Perhaps you projected the right to be admired. Perhaps you projected the right to be wanted without proving yourself. Whatever you projected, it now returns to you like a lost inheritance. That is why you feel strangely empty after leaving, because you have not yet reclaimed the psychic gold you placed in them. This is a sacred law. Every projection is a hidden map back to the self. So when you say, they were so powerful, you may be speaking of your own power disowned. When you say, they were so confident, you may be speaking of your own confidence unclaimed. When you say, they were so free, you may be speaking of your own freedom postponed. And when you reclaim this, you stop longing for them because you realize the part of them you worshipped was your own soul reflected back at you through distortion. Now the narcissist's language becomes irrelevant because you are learning your own language. And what is your language? It is the language of authenticity. It is the language of direct truth. It is the language of boundaries spoken without hatred. It is the language of the adult who no longer tries to bargain for love. It is the language of the psyche that refuses to participate in unreality. This is why, in the final stage, you begin to feel something almost frightening, indifference, not coldness, indifference. Indifference is not cruelty. It is the end of entanglement. It is what happens when the emotional cords dissolve, and to many empaths, indifference feels sinful. They think, if I stop caring, I become like them. But this is misunderstanding. Indifference toward manipulation is not narcissism. It is freedom. It is the psyche no longer feeding a parasite. Yes, parasiter, let us speak plainly. A narcissistic dynamic is parasitic because it feeds on your emotional energy while giving little in return. It extracts attention, care, devotion, forgiveness, labor, and uses it to sustain an image. When you stop feeding it, the parasite thrashes. It calls you selfish. It calls you cruel. It calls you ungrateful. It tries to shame you back into servitude, but shame is only powerful when you still believe you deserve it. And here is the final initiation. The empath must become shameless in their self-respect, not arrogant, not grandiose. Shameless in the sense that you no longer accept shame as a control mechanism. You no longer accept guilt for protecting yourself. You no longer apologize for leaving what hurts you. You no longer perform goodness to stay safe. This is the alchemical transformation. The empath's sensitivity becomes strength. In alchemy, there is a process. The raw material is heated, broken down, purified, recombined. The old form must die so a new form can emerge. Narcissistic relationships often function like an alchemical furnace. They burn away illusion. They burn away naivety. They burn away the childlike belief that love can be earned by suffering. They burn away the fantasy that you can rescue someone who refuses themselves. And what remains if you endure the fire without returning to the old spell is gold, wholeness. Now, what does wholeness look like in everyday life? It looks quiet. It looks like you no longer feel compelled to explain your boundaries. It looks like you can say no without a speech. It looks like you trust the first signal in your body rather than the last argument in your mind. It looks like you stop chasing closure. It looks like you stop keeping the door cracked open just in case. It looks like you stop rereading messages as if they contain the truth. It looks like you stop waiting for them to become real. It looks like you begin to live again. And the narcissist senses this as death, because to them, your wholeness is a mirror of their fragmentation. Your peace is an accusation. Your stability is a humiliation. Your joy without them is unbearable. So what do? Sometimes they leave. Sometimes they find a new mirror. Sometimes they smear you. Sometimes they return years later with a message designed to reopen the wound. But none of that matters as much as what you do inside. Because the final victory is internal. The final victory is that you no longer abandon yourself to remain connected to someone else. And now I want to leave you with an image, because the psyche learns through symbol. Imagine your inner world as a temple. For years, this temple had its doors open. People walked in and out. Some came with love. Some came with hunger. Some came with theft. And you, as the empath, stood at the altar offering incense, believing that devotion alone would protect the sacred space. But devotion without guardianship invites invasion. Now, after learning their language, you hire a guardian, not an external guardian, but an inner one. Your discernment, your instinct, your boundary, your warrior. This guardian stands at the entrance of your temple and asks one question of everyone who approaches. Are you real? Not, are you charming? Not, are you wounded? Not, are you interesting? Not, do you need me? Are you real? And if they are not real, the gate does not open. That is the mature empath, not someone who stops loving, but someone who stops making love a doorway for self-destruction. When the narcissist realizes the empath has learned their language, it is not merely that you can detect manipulation, it is that you have stepped out of the unconscious role assigned to you. You are no longer the rescuer, you are no longer the mirror, you are no longer the container, you are no longer the good child begging to be chosen. You become the adult soul, you become the witness, you become the one who sees, and in Jungian terms, that means you are moving toward the self, the psychic center that is older than trauma, older than relationships, older than wounds. The self does not panic, the self does not plead, the self does not bargain, the self simply knows. And once you taste that knowing, you will never again be fully hypnotized by someone else's unreality. That is why the narcissist panics, because you are no longer speaking their language, you are speaking truth, and truth is the one force the false self cannot survive. You do not need revenge, you do not need to prove anything, you do not need them to understand. The only thing you need finally is to remain loyal to the part of you that woke up, because that awakening is not just the end of a relationship, it is the beginning of your life.